All right, here we are talking about coaching. Um, as always, now my name is Yannick. That rarely changes. Nikki, hey, you with us?
Hey.
Silver sends his apologies. He can't make it today. We decided at short notice, let's go ahead because, well, I like Nikki and it's nice to catch up. We tend to only see each other for these now. But you're passing through London after 2 months in Indonesia, you said, no?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I've just come back from a trip of sorts as well, which also lasted about 2 months. Um, because sadly, and some of you might have heard that already through other channels, but my dad died beginning of July, and this is 2025. So it's been a different kind of trip, right? And I've been back at work for the last week. I've had a few sessions at some point, not in between, but like I've taken a good couple of weeks off. I came back to like 3 days of work. I've seen a few clients that I've known really well, that I felt quite safe. Um, and yeah, now I feel like I'm back in the saddle, but also grief works its ways in interesting ways, right? These four stages, they're not, many people experience them. They're not necessarily linear. I think we've come to an understanding that everybody works through grief in very different ways. And Nikki and I, we just talked about it a little bit. And so we thought, given that for me, it was very fresh to think about, well, do I talk about this with clients? At which point do I feel ready to come back to psychological relational work? Um, when and how and under what circumstances do I disclose that this has happened for me? Um, I think many coaches have experienced grief, and Nikki, you've experienced grief recently as well. So we had a good conscious looking into ourselves. Like, is that something that we maybe want to open the door to a larger audience? And we decided that yes, I think this would be really meaningful because lots of coaches. I mean, every human being will experience loss and grief. It's just a matter of time, right? And I know many coaches will have experienced that, and some of them I had in supervision, and they were asking themselves those kind of questions. And now I have a personal experience of it, and you have some personal experience of it. So we decided, well, let's open that door and see if we can put some of those questions on the table and maybe offer some insights, some questions, something to help other people navigate it, just by sharing how we've navigated that. Yeah. Nikki, would you add anything to that for
Yeah,
context?
no. Thanks for the intro and yeah, again, so sorry for your loss and like you said, I can also personally relate and yeah, I think the topic of grief and like how to work with that in coaching, um hopefully yeah, will be helpful for many people.
Yeah. Um, how long has it been for you? I wonder. And like I know you're coaching on and off because you do a lot of surf coaching, which is
Mm,
different kind of psychological relationship. But
yeah.
could you tell us a bit more about how you've experienced that, like a bit of context for how you've navigated
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, so like you said, for me, coaching has been a bit on and off. But in relationship to grief, so I lost my dad in 2020, and that was completely sudden and unexpected. It was also at the same time that COVID was kind of hitting, and that created all sorts of complications with the fact that I'm quite nomadic. My parents lived between different places, and it was obviously a difficult time to travel. So, as well as the grief, like there was that wider context that applied a lot of pressure. And then now, a year and a bit ago, my mom passed away. So 3 years after my dad, and again, completely suddenly and unexpectedly.
Mm.
Um, so I feel like I've been sitting a little bit in that subject of grief for like since my dad, and now with my mom renewed and all the like logistical complications that come into that, and not having wider family. So for me, I have to say, it has been in a sense overwhelming, as in like to the extent of consuming me at a personal level, that I haven't felt like going back into coaching more, although that's been something I've wanted to do, has
Mm.
been accessible or responsible, like the responsible thing for me to do at that time. I've been mainly focused on my own therapy, on dealing with various facets of grief. Um, Whilst actually for me doing something a lot more physically active and a bit like lighter, like the surf coaching, which
Mm.
as much as it has the elements of coaching applied to a different subject, has been really kind of important in giving me structure and connection and many things. But I think when you're holding space as a life coach of sorts for other people and their like history and emotional and psychological background, like that has felt for me personally out of reach. But I feel like slowly I'm making my way back into feeling like that's accessible to me.
Yeah, and I think that was the main question that I was sitting with as well. Like, at what point am I okay to be back in like a psychological relationship, right? I mean, there's different styles of coaching, and self coaching is a good example, perhaps at the other side of the spectrum, right?
Mm.
Where you teach, you help somebody develop a skill. I mean, it opens a lot of doors into quite some deep psychological work, right? But you can just teach someone a skill. And there's this kind of coaching as well, where you just help somebody develop a skill. You know, the performance type coaching that perhaps many coaches and organizations do, or, you know, just figuring out how to manage your timetable. I mean, there's a lot of safe ways of doing some coaching that doesn't have that relational human to human. We're working with psychological dynamics and, you know, vibing with each other, being with each other, creating a space where we can really tune into the other person's energy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think so that other type of coaching is relatively safe to do, and people can come back to it because it's more of I'm doing coaching, I'm delivering some skills, right?
Mm.
But when it gets to that other kind of coaching where we hold space, where we feel really tuned in, then what my concern was, well, that person is going to tune into my energy too, you know. And many of my clients are really very aware and very sensitive to energies and how somebody shows up in a space. And obviously, on some level, I'm going to bring some heaviness to the space that I hold. So I wasn't quite sure how that's going to go. So I had a few sessions. I remember the first day back, I was working with a group that worked together for, I don't know, over 2 years probably now. And they're just really amazing group that gave each other so much, so much strength and so much space to just be yourself. And given that when I facilitate groups, I'm just one of the group, right? I do have a somewhat different standing, but I just relate to them at eye level. So they actually offered me a slot, which I found it really touched me, right? But it didn't feel like that was appropriate. And also, I have spaces where I process that, right? My wife is a psychoanalyst, or trained at least. I've been working with a psychoanalyst myself at the time. I have my coach is also an existential therapist, right? So I've been doing the work, so I didn't really need that from the group, but it was really touching that they offered it. But in those groups, particularly, I always check in, right? We always check in, and I'm part of the check-in, because the reason for that is that we bring some of those energies out and we acknowledge them. It's not that we have to work on them, but at least if something big is happening in your life, you acknowledge it when the group starts, so that people can make sense of maybe there being some heaviness. And the heaviness is not in response to something that anybody just said. It's just the heaviness that they bring into the room, right? So first of all, because of that routine, there wasn't any way around it other than me being dishonest, and that's not how I coach. Right? But also, it was important because when I bring something, and I'm generally very present, and I can put things in my box and keep them there. I got quite good at that, right? To distinguish what is my stuff, what is created here. But also, I didn't quite know how it was going to go. Somebody making a comment about something that reminds me of my dad, it might just bring something up, right? And when you have quite aware, sensitive coaches in the room, there's no hiding that. It's like there's no poker facing that. I mean, depends what kind of person you are, but like I know I'm quite transparent, and some things they just kind of come up. So it was important to me to acknowledge that. One-to-one conversations, I think it's a bit different, right? Because I do check in, and often it can be this, you know, meeting of two human beings, and we kind of exchange how we are. There was one session where the client tuned in, and as soon as I saw him, there was a heavy energy there. So we just tuned into that, and there wasn't an exchange of, hey, how are you? How are you? And like, we just kind of acknowledged what's there in the room right in front of us. And my commitment is always with the client first. So with that situation, I didn't acknowledge because it didn't it's not that it didn't matter, but it didn't feel right. It wasn't going to be helpful as such. So we kind of jumped straight into where the client was, and that was completely fine. It felt right. With another client, they asked me, with one of the clients, it was obvious that I had to disclose it because I had moved the session when he was admitted to hospital, and then I had moved it again the week later when he died, right? So I had moved the session twice, and obviously, and not obviously, but I felt it would have been weird not to acknowledge what had happened because this is obviously very rare that this happens. So that was clear that I would disclose it because, with another one, it just felt right in the moment because I'm the kind of coach that does disclose, right? And what I've noticed is that because endings and temporality were in the room from the get-go, just by me acknowledging it, and I think the balance is to acknowledge it without then making it a session about me, right? Even if they ask more questions, like I want to be careful that this is not going to shift where the focus is, right? I just really want to acknowledge it so that you know what was been happening, and maybe as part of some contracting around, if you notice something, some heavy energy from me, that's probably why it is. But you can trust me that I'll deal with that. But I want to avoid making any kind of assumptions, or you feel weirded out because I seem to have a heavy response to something that you said. That's why it's important for me to acknowledge it. And so, as part of a contracting conversation, it can be really helpful. But what happened, what I noticed that I found really, really valuable is that because endings and temporality and finitude, were in the room from the get-go, quite a few clients opened doors to their own experience of having lost a parent or having grieved about something or a big ending that may be looming in their life, or it felt like they were opening doors and having conversations with themselves that otherwise they wouldn't have had today if I hadn't brought that in. And in a way, I've brought it in, but in a way, it was already in the room. So there's no bringing it. So it's not really, I don't see it as I'm leading or guiding the conversation. It's just we're having a human encounter here as coach and client, as human and human. And you asked me how I am. So I'm not going to lie, but also I'm not going to make it about myself. And I realized that apparently I've carried it and brought it in a way that it was still clear that the focus is on the client and my commitment is to them. And then they kind of, I'm not sure, took the invitation I wanted to say, but it wasn't really an invitation to talk about anything connected to endings. But it seems that many of those clients have taken it like that. And that were, without exception, really valuable conversations. Right? So I don't know what they would have talked about it if it was a session where none of this had happened. Don't know if it would have been more helpful or less helpful, but it certainly never felt like a distraction. And so I think that's some of the magic of getting together as two human beings, where you just go with what's present. And if this is present in the room and then they resonate with what's present in the room, that was really helpful. And I did have some sessions where we just acknowledged it and then they just talked about something completely different, right? Mm-hmm. That was also fine. So I didn't feel like I'm priming this too much. Still a question you could ask, right? But yeah, it all felt quite right and very meaningful and quite valuable. And I hadn't quite anticipated that. But there is a larger question around how much of yourself do you disclose? And some things I certainly learned throughout the years is that even if somebody asks you where have you been on holiday, just talking a little bit about what there is, and then clients resonate with something. I mean, maybe also the way that I talk about holiday might be a bit more philosophical and a bit more about inquiry and interesting themes that come up, I remember one moment where I said, oh, well, I've got mixed feelings. Right. And I'm not sure if it was after or before my dad passed, but I remember opening a session, somebody asked me, oh, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And I don't know, mixed feelings. On the one hand, I'm feeling this, and on the one hand, I'm feeling that. On the one hand, things are good, on the one hand, things are challenging. And then that really opened something up because that person was also sitting with mixed feelings about something completely different and unrelated. But it kind of brought that conversation to the fore. So I'm quite a fan of just tuning in and being real. And then being careful that this is not going to be a session about us. Well, we're making Like we're agreeing that this is a good thing for us to talk about. And if there was something to follow up from the last session, maybe just quickly checking, like, hey, we kind of drifted into this conversation just by how we showed up. Is that a good use of our time? I'm aware that last time we ended up talking about that, and I'm also curious about how that's been going, right? But just checking with you, what kind of is this a good conversation, or do you want to go back to? Still recording. That's a good thing. Okay. Can you hear me still? I should
Yeah,
level
I can hear
myself
you
down a
now.
bit, maybe. Hold on. Check one, check two. Yeah, I think that's better. Right. Oh, that's also still really loud. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, no, that's still very loud. So I cannot go lower than that. Wait, this is the mic. Check. That was one click too much.
Now I can hear you again. Yeah.
Yeah. Is this better? Oh, I can't even select this one. Interesting. Okay, as long as I'm not in overdrive too much. Okay.
Don't worry, if it's like totally crazy, I'll just equalize it. I'll fix it.
Yeah. All right. Sorry, the sound changed probably a little bit. My computer started having issues with my sound card, which probably is a sign that there's another death soon. So, yeah. I think where I left off was that, the doors opened into conversations that otherwise wouldn't have happened, and that this kind of self-disclosure is also part of why I like the existential approach to coaching, because there tends to be a more human to human relationship rather than a mask, a professional mask, right? And my experience is it leads to more profound conversation that way, but it also feels more vulnerable, right? Yeah. What do you make of that? Did you have those experiences? Because you said you just kind of toned the coaching down, but like, what was it like for you when you found yourself back into it? Did you ever tell a client that these things were happening? Or how soon after did you feel able to work with clients in a more relational kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come back to. I really want to acknowledge everything you've shared, and I feel like yeah, it's made my mind think a lot of things I'd like to get back to you on. But in answer to your question just now, I mean, like since then, I haven't really ever resumed coaching. I have been approached by people who I've met actually through surf coaching, who just, like obviously, I made an impression on them, and they were keen to actually try out more conventional life coaching with me. And I just said, and I think I actually referred maybe someone to you. I don't know if they ever got in touch. I said, like, I'm really sorry at this time. This has happened in my life. And I don't feel like I feel available to do coaching work right now. But I can, if you're still interested, I can refer you to some colleagues who I think you'd be in very good hands. And yeah, that's just been my take on it up till now, And now there's been such a significant gap anyway. I feel like I need to like ease my way back into it. So that's been my kind of dealing with that. And, it's also probably a reflection of my character and how I've needed to handle things and how I approach things very like gradually and like creating safety for myself and also protecting the people who I want to work with. But yeah, a lot came up for me when you've been sharing your experiences. I mean, first and foremost, I just, yeah, want to like acknowledge, like I said, you for being so open with your clients. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about coaching, and is interesting because actually the lack of self-disclosure I found recently has felt quite limiting in my therapy, even though I understand they are two very different approaches. But I even named that in therapy and just said, like, if we're speaking about authenticity and also about shared human experiences, then I think having a trusting relationship with the person who's coaching you, and I guess that's what you hopefully contract and sign yourself up for when you commit to working with someone as your coach. You trust them to be able to, like, yeah, self-disclose in a way that is appropriate. And you named that there were situations in which it didn't seem appropriate to, or you named it but it didn't seem appropriate to like go into it more, or like in the group setting. And then there's other times where it's kind of opened amazing or like significant conversations. But I think it's again with the coach to be able to have that discernment and that self-awareness and to take responsibility in their work for how they're going to handle it. But I also really understand and trust and believe that those conversations that it opens up, if people are able to have them, are, where else you necessarily get the opportunity to delve into a subject that's for a lot of people like sad and scary and can bring up fear and anxiety, but is also so human and intimate. And to have someone who you can trust and who understands to share about with that. So that's the one thing. And it reminded me of a book that I coincidentally had been recommended just before my dad even passed away. And it's called Staring at the Sun by is it
Irvin
Irvin
Yalom.
Yalom?
Yeah.
And, I remember I then started reading it as my dad had just passed away. And it was, in a way, such a beautiful experience, because it really addresses the fact that, in our Western culture specifically, like, our contact with death is like so censored and taboo in many ways. We don't speak about it, and like it's sometimes not even something we acknowledge. Which also reminds me, I did a existential coaching workshop, and I was the youngest participant, and there was people who are like 10, 20 years older than me. And when the facilitator asked, has anyone here ever thought about their own death, I was virtually the only person to put up my hand, even though I was
Oh,
the
wow.
youngest of the lot, right? And so I really value and embrace existentialism for that. And like I said, this book by Irvine Yalom, which made me think a lot. Like, I personally think it is important and it is valuable to be able to face a reality that's inescapable to no one, both for ourselves and for the ones in our life who we love. And like, the more we can, speak about that, it takes away this fear and and opens up like something really beautiful as well. Because, I think like a lot of grief is just often about love, like, and to be able to integrate that more rather than reject it or have these walls up against it. So I don't know. I muddled everything together, but as per usual, you'll make sense of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts coming up for me as well. First of all, I came across this quote that said, grief is love with nowhere to go.
Sounds familiar, yeah.
And I thought that was really profound. I was thinking about Irvin Yalom, because he, at some point, I saw him in like a live workshop slash talk, and he had lost his wife. For those who are not familiar with Irvin Yalom, he wrote quite a magnificent book that he had started to write together with his wife, and then in the process of writing the book, his wife died. And then he finished the book reflecting on his experience of grief. And so not long after the book came out, this workshop had happened, and he was already in his 80s. Right? His memory wasn't very good anymore, and he, at this point, already only did single sessions because of that. Right? That's a whole other topic of like single session therapy, right? When you have this kind of presence and there's someone tuning in, it's not relevant, the future and the past, quite often, right? But what I remember him saying, and this was a bit of a challenge for me, was, well, for context, existential work is most of all phenomenological, right? That means we're really tuning into the experience of someone. And when we work phenomenologically, what we do is we bracket everything that we think we know about whatever it is that they're talking about. So we can really tune into their experience. And we don't ask questions from a position of knowing. We ask questions to explore and be curious about their experience. And that sounds familiar, I'm sure, to many coaches, because most coaches will work hard to be able to explore and relate to someone from a position of not knowing. Right? We often ask better questions. I mean, you can debate what's the better question. Is the better question from a position of knowing or from a position of unknowing? But there's certainly a lot of doors that open when we really relate to someone from a position of not knowing and forget everything we think we know. Because especially around grief, our experience is probably different to the experience of the person we're talking to. So working phenomenologically always meant for me that I don't need to have experienced whatever this person is bringing. And I can do excellent work with them, and sometimes even much better work than somebody who thinks they have experienced something like that. Because the reality is, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what it's like, no matter how close my experience was to your experience. Right? So I cannot say I understand, because I don't, because I'm not you. So hearing Irvin Yalom say, come back to that, is he said since he's experienced the loss of his life partner, he works much better with people who have experienced loss. And I'm like, oh, wait a second, but that kind of really challenges the phenomenological theory behind this. It's similar in coaching, for example. I have a lot of coaches in supervision. They're like, oh, I want to do more corporate leadership work, but I've never been a corporate leader. So can I really serve them well? It's one thing to be selected because of your background as a leader. That initially creates just a trust for people. But then they might expect some sort of mentorship from you, or for you to understand what it's like to be them. And so when we approach the work existentially, then regardless of what we've experienced in our lives and what we've done and how much experience or no experience we have, it really doesn't matter that much. And so now hearing Erwin Yalom, one of my kind of role models of existential work, say that he's now working with people who experience loss much better since he's experienced that kind of loss was really a challenge to my kind of coaching philosophy. But what I know is certainly true is that when you say you've experienced loss and somebody else has experienced loss, there's an immediate connection. There's an immediate, oh, this person gets me kind of illusion. It is an illusion, right? And yet there's a strong connection, which really helps the coaching. It brings some challenges because they might now expect that you understand, even though really you don't. But there are some parallels. And I mean, grief works in different ways for different people, but you don't need to say, I understand or I know what you're going through, but you can say, hey, I've also lost somebody very close to me. So a lot of what you say really resonates with me. That doesn't mean I understand. It just means it resonates and I feel very connected, maybe more connected than somebody who hasn't experienced loss of a very significant person in their life. Right? So that sort of connection can really lay a wonderful foundation for excellent work. And, they don't tend to expect you to have answers depending on what your initial contracting is, right? So in that sense, it can really help, but it could also be in the way, right? So I don't think I understand if people don't disclose something like that because it is very personal and it's a personal decision. The other thing that came to me that I really wanted to mention still is I heard Brené Brown say that when you share and disclose these sort of things, share your scars, don't share your wounds. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it made perfect sense to me because, when we self-disclose from a position of having already processed this and, we can really share from a very strong position with a lot of wisdom, learning, there's a lot in there. So she's not a therapist. She's not she's a researcher at heart and turned consultant and, leadership guru and, life wisdom lady. She's amazing. I love her, but it's a bit different to the kind of work that we do. So for me, it's not a scar yet, right? But it's also not an open wound with a lot of blood coming out, right? So if you cannot hold it together as soon as you talk about the person you've loved, then maybe you're not ready to go back to that kind of work or to talk about those kind of topics. But also, I can't say that I've fully processed it, obviously. I mean, it might take years. Yeah. It might never be fully processed. It's a very existential time. So I'd say there's definitely a wound. But I've experienced this to be very helpful. And I think I would feel that, I'm not ready because as soon as I talk about it, I have to spend so much time focusing on myself to hold it together or to, still be professional that this would not be appropriate to work with someone in that state. But if my voice breaks a little bit here or there, I'm sure people have heard it now, then it just means that it's there and it's human, right? And I just want to make sure that my attention and focus is as much on the client as possible, but also it's on the coaching, which means the attention is also with me. But if it feels distracting and I feel like I'm doing you a disservice because I'm spending so much time figuring out how to hold this in check or not let it come out, then I don't think I would be ready to coach. And that's not been my experience. That's why, I feel confident showing up like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's exactly as you say, people have to judge for themselves. Like, it's like our professional responsibility to make that call of like what's fair on ourselves and on our client. Obviously, it's hopefully working in the work that we do, we have a disposition to being more self-reflective and having that self-awareness. In your case, also, it sounds like, you have a good network of people who are able to like support you, like your wife, and you're doing some psychoanalytic work, it sounds like, as well. So, you have all of those resources. And I think, something that might come into it as well is, again, there's a difference, I think, say, between you and me. You're someone who's done coaching intensively, worked with people for so many years. You're far more fluent and experienced and like expert in it than someone, again, who's maybe just was at that starting out phase, never quite managed to launch because of COVID and then personal, like life events that have happened. So I think it's, again, having to make that call, for yourself, what's right for me and what's best for my clients. And that, what I was just going to say, and I really like that wound and scar analogy, but also like, I think an experience which I find relatable is being a parent, right? Like I don't have children, but I can imagine what it could be like to be a parent based on what peers and friends share with me about being a parent. But ultimately, I'm never going to know what that feels like until I am a parent. And it's the same with grief and death. I think we humanly can all conceptually understand how it must feel for someone to lose someone so close, and we all experience grief about little life events all the time, be it a separation from someone. There's all these things that are grief, but then there is that grief that is so personal when it's a parent as well, no matter what your relationship with them is and was as well, which I think can add to the complexity of grieving. But yeah, I think all of that to say, I think, when you've personally experienced something like grief or a parent or becoming a parent, I think it's almost like a color palette. You add another color to your palette and it gives you even more nuance and stuff in your personal experience of life and the palette of emotions. And I think, again, I just see that in many ways once it's kind of been processed enough to be not a gushing wound, but, being tended to, or a scar of some sort, that is only going to like give more depth and flavor and nuance to the kind of work you're able to do in your coaching, if that kind of more relational and authentic sharing your own self in it to the benefit of the client is part of the work you do. And I think, again, me personally, I'm so for that.
Yeah, and I know we've not got much time left, but there's one thing that came up that I still want to mention, because it was one of our colleagues, Matteo Trevisan, who was in the coaching lab at some point, and he's held space for someone who's gone through some really difficult times, and he didn't plan to, but it turned out to be an IFS, internal family system session, and in IFS work, there's quite a bit of guidance, and the question, what makes it coaching rather than therapy, in IFS is maybe less important because they don't really distinguish between that so much, right? But there is this line between what they call an exile and where it gets into quite traumatic experiences. And what I remember Matteo saying, that he's almost died, right? He had a very severe illness and he was looking death in the eye, right? It was very close. Like he was at the time, he was making his peace with that being a very real scenario, and possibly quite soon. And he said, having lived through experiences like that, there's a saying of, you can only take a person as far as you have gone yourself, right? And I think it's quite a nuanced statement, because it doesn't mean that you have to have experienced it all, but it means that if you have lived through scenarios that really challenged a lot about your life, it means that the quality of the space that you're holding is one of, you can meet those topics with much more confidence in, I can hold space for this, because it's not shocking me because I've done a lot of processing around these kind of experiences, right? So I think there's something about the quality of the space that you're holding when you have lived through a lot of these kind of things. Doesn't mean that you can't if you haven't, but there's something about just how it feels to be in someone's presence that has lived through similar things, that they don't even need to disclose it. You just feel it in their presence. So in that sense, there's always meaning in suffering, right? And so it's not like silver linings or think positively, but you can grieve and go through all the emotions and also value those experiences as something that's going to make the tapestry of your existence richer and the space that you're holding more profound. So I think it was Viktor Frankl who wrote about how there's always the possibility for meaning is always there. Alfred Lengler, I know, I met him once. He had told that to the group that he was speaking to. There's always the possibility for meaning, regardless of how big your suffering is. You can choose that to be a meaningful experience and also a terrible experience. And I've thought about these people and these wisdoms a lot as I've been going through this experience. It's not that the philosophy takes the grief from you, but it certainly helps to build that kind of resilience, this kind of existential resilience to have confronted these topics. And I realized and now experienced firsthand that it will really help your clients as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, thanks for sharing so openly, Yannick. I know it's still fresh. And hopefully that was helpful for other people.
Yeah, I hope so too. If you resonated with this, as always, right, I'd be curious to hear when and how people started disclosing this or gotten back into work. I'm sure there's plenty of moving stories out in the ether of our audience. So if you feel moved by this conversation, you want to be part of this conversation, pick it up, have it with someone, right? If it's not us, talk to some of your colleagues, because, it's something a lot of people don't talk about, endings and death. And I think that's the reason why a lot of those clients have really jumped on it, because all of a sudden it feels like they could, because they're responding to someone else who's opened the door, and sometimes that's all it takes, just open the door. So I think if we can open more of those doors and hold a quality space behind them, then I think the world is a better place. So thank you all. All right, that was us talking about coaching. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I appreciate your commitment to being the best coach you can be. I always say, if any of this resonates, make it swing. We grow through conversations. So if you found value in this episode, please go on and share it, or with another coaching colleague of yours or a friend. Anything that we can do to help people get inspired to reflect more on their coaching and be better coaches. I really believe in the generative impact that coaching has. So if you wanted to support the coaching and this mission, then what you can do is share this, right? Talk to somebody, send a link to someone, have that conversation with someone. What would really help us is to leave a positive review or a rating on one of the podcasting platforms. Generally, the more people we reach, the more time and effort we can put into creating these episodes for you. And higher quality means also more conversations, maybe inviting high-profile guests into the conversation. That'd be a dream of ours. So you can make this worth it. And I appreciate you being with us, and I appreciate you considering to help. So thank you. See you soon. Send us a question.